Yes.
Keep distance between like and
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Sorry if I can. Yes. Yeah. Someone's turned that. Can you turn it back to 16? Yes, it was 16, Mike. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes, that's okay. Yes, thank you. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So yesterday we started a new subject matter, and for those who weren't here yesterday, they may become a bit confused, so I do apologize in advance. So, because of certain things which have been uttered by certain individuals, such as 90% of Bihar al-Anwar is superstition, or 80% of Sheikh Kholaini's Al-Kafi is not Sahih, is not sound. I thought one has to try to either refute or explain in relation to the second statement what is being said and how these things can become abused. So we decided to, on a beginner's level for myself and others, to explain certain mechanisms of action involved in the science of hadith. And we gave a few definitions and explained that there are two main components. One is the chain of transmission, that's important, and the other is the content. Then we started with the chain of transmissions, we explained what it is, and said there are many contextual indicators which have a role in relation to the weakness or strength of a given chain of transmission. And the most important contextual indicator is that of who are the transmitters. And we discussed that first contextual indicator at some length. We haven't started the content yet, we're still on the chain of transmissions now. There are many contextual indicators, or qara'in as they say in Arabic, which play a role in defining the weakness or strength of a given chain of transmission. The first one was who are the transmitters, and this is the most important contextual indicator, depending on who they were, and we went through the descriptions. I don't want to repeat all that again. For a minority of mujtahids of old and today even, this one contextual indicator of who the transmitter is, what kind of a person, that is the most important and prevailing contextual indicator. They don't look at the other contextual indicators to any serious degree. So it really ends there for them. It's a minority position. Ayatollah Khoury rahmatullah alayh had this position, that he said this is the only important thing in a chain of transmission. who are the transmitters. There were one or two other things he said, we'll come to that too, but this was the most important. But 95% of the mujtahids today and of old, they didn't have this position. They said it's very important who the transmitters are, but there are other contextual indicators too. They can upgrade the weakness or strength of a narration, a hadith, which may seem weak or semi-weak or halfway through, not sahih, not sound, but they can upgrade it. The other indicators can upgrade a hadith which is weak or is decent or is reliable, muwaththaq. They can upgrade it to a degree which is on a par with a sound hadith. So you see, there is a difference here in approach, but one has to take in mind that 95% have this second approach. It's a more holistic approach. Now, let's start with the second indicator. So this is where we left off. And that is, if the tradition, if the hadith is narrated by one of three noble sheikhs, and the three are mentioned who they are. If one of these three are in the chain of hadith, accept it, no matter what. Ayatollah Sistani and the late Shahid Sad have this opinion. There may be others too, but I didn't exhaust the list, go through every mujtahid. So here they say, if either of the following three are mentioned in a chain of hadith, so the chain is here, A to B to C to D to E, from the disciple, then from the imam. If any of these three and the date of their demise is mentioned, so they're in the time of imam, the 6th imam, 7th imam, 8th imam, thereabouts. If you see one of these three names, Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr, Safwan ibn Yahya, ibn Abi Nadr, Bazanti, let's say if one of these three is in D, let's say they are D, in the D position. As long as you know it's them, so A, B, C would have to be reliable, so that D is a definite. If one of those three is D, you don't have to look at E to the imam, because of who they are, because of the meticulousness they are famous for. If, let's say, Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr is D in this chain, you don't have to look at E or the disciple. You can take it for granted it's from the imam. They don't say this for others, but for these three they do. And the proofs are in the study of the biographies of these people. The meticulousness, what they've done. And if they are E, you don't have to look at who the disciple is, although it's usually there, and in some cases they were disciples of the imams. They were disciples of one of the imams or two of the imams. So even if the chain was to be incomplete after them to the imam, it doesn't matter. Even if you didn't know who E or the disciple was, but D was one of those three, although A, B, C has to be reliable too. So you know that, let's say, Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr has said such a thing. But once that's substantiated, even if the chain is incomplete, you don't even know them, it's not mentioned, it doesn't matter, you can accept it. So this is a contextual indicator. Now, Ayatollah Khoui didn't have this. Okay? But most of them do have it today. Although, there was one Islamic scholar who, although I'm not a historian, so what I'm about to say, take it with a pinch of salt. There was an Iraqi scholar by the name of Allame Murtada Askari. He was a'lam, most learned in Islamic history. It was as if he was living in those times, the books that he's written. Many of these books have been written in English, have been translated into English. It may not be the best of translations, but they are there. And in other languages too. For example, the role of the A'imma in the revival of religion. These have to be taught to children. You don't need to, for a teacher in history, instead of telling that person to teach history, tell them to teach this book to children. Because when they teach for themselves, they bring a lot of personal information out. When you want a history teacher, they have to teach a standard book in history, not talk out of their own. This is causing problems in our youth. He said, this historian, Allame Askari, although he was a mujtahid, but he said that in relation to Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr, when we say this, that if he's there, we take it as a given, that's for ahadith in relation to fiqhi matters, not in aqaid. So we have that too. But in any case, these three were very authoritative, that if they're in the link, there afterwards to the Imam, take it for granted. Ayatul Akhui didn't have this, but Ayatul Akhui had other things which others didn't have. For example, there's a book, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the last session or it was in the gathering after the session, so I'm a bit confused whether I've said it or not, so I'll just repeat it. In the book Kamil Ziyarat by Ibn Qulaway, who was in the 4th century, who was the Ustad of Sheikh Mufid and a very big figure. Ibn Qulaway there says that whoever transmitter I've brought, it's only reliable. Ayatul Akhui studied his biography, his works, his research. It led him to say, I agree with what he said. He's authoritative in what he's saying. And therefore, Ayatul Akhui, with his very restrictive criterion of only who the transmitters are, is of importance. With what he's confessed to, or accepted rather, he says, whichever transmitter is mentioned in Kamil Ziyarat, even if the experts of biographies who also lived in the 4th, 5th and 6th century, who writes the book like Najashi and Kashi, Sheikh Tusi, then later on Allama Hindi in the 7th century, and so on and so forth. Usually when you want to see who the transmitter is, one of these books have to substantiate the justice of that person. And then you analyze the transmitters. But here, because of what Ibn Qulaway said, Ayatul Akhui said that, yes, I accept his statement, and so any transmitter mentioned by Ibn Qulaway in Kamil Ziyarat, even if no expert of biography has mentioned their name, none of them, I give the stamp of approval to his reliability. It's an incredible statement. Some of his students say that he changed towards the end of his life. Okay, he may have, I don't know, but also he says something similar, and he kept with this until the end, in relation to Ali ibn Ibrahim. He has a tafsir, a student of the 11th Imam. He's a well-known tafsir. And Ayatul Akhui say, whatever transmitter is mentioned there, and it's around 300 transmitters. Even if the experts of Rijal, the biographies of the transmitters, they don't substantiate the justice of those 300, or don't even mention the name. They don't even mention the name of some of them. It doesn't matter. He's given his stamp of approval. But with these three, he hasn't. You see, this is how it changes. But if one of these three are in those, through that route, he gives his stamp of approval. Okay. So this is another contextual indicator. And what does it mean? Because we said for a sahih, if you remember, a sound, which was class 1 of the different types of hadith, if it's sound, transmission-wise, it had to be a complete chain, all 12 imami, and just. But if you accept this, or you accept one of those two of Ayatollah Khoei's universal set of approvals, then you may have an incomplete chain of transmission in more than one way, but it will still be regarded as sahih because of this. It's upgraded what wouldn't have been a sahih hadith, a sound hadith, has been upgraded to one. Remember, there was sound, there was hasan, decent, muwaththaq, trustworthy or reliable, and then there was weak. The weak, the muwaththaq and the decent can be upgraded because of these contextual indicators. Even with Ayatollah Khoi, with a very restricted approach and methodology, even there it can be upgraded. Okay, another indicator, another contextual, number 3. There are 44, we'll just go through 5 or 6. A hadith exists in all 3 of Kafi, Tahdhib and Faqih. Kafi by Sheikh Kulaini, Tahdhib by Sheikh Tusi, and Faqih, Man La Yahdurul Faqih by Sheikh Sadur. Here, if a hadith or in all 3 collections, the same hadith you see in all 3 collections, you can accept it. It has the ruling of a sahih and sound hadith, even if the chains of transmissions are weak. Look, Ayatollah Khoi again doesn't accept this. He says, no, it doesn't matter. I can't just accept it like this. I can't accept. The majority do accept, including Imam Khomeini and the leader, but the reason for accepting it is that when you have 3 hadith of different chains in 3 different sources, they say the absence of a joint coordination to lie or to spread falsehood, the absence of such a coordination is significant. It becomes implausible now. Come on, these are joint in the time of Ma'sooms. They're giving traditions from the Ma'soom. It's very implausible for this to happen. So the chains may be weak, but you do accept the hadith. Now imagine when I said Ayatollah Behboudi, now he did this analysis on Al-Kafi. And he only looked at the sound hadith. If it wasn't sound, he would put it aside. So look how many ahadith he would put aside. But with this contextual indicator, there may be a hadith which isn't sound, but it doesn't lose its legitimacy because the same hadith with the same meaning in other books exist. The same content has been related in other books too. And in those other books, there's a number of them, and they're all saying the same thing. Some of them may even be sound in other books, even more so. That would show the strength of the hadith. So, now, but Ayatollah Behboudi most probably wanted to do a bit of research, play with the statistics to see what the statistics are. We shouldn't come and then just take Al-Kafi and don't look anywhere else like we do with the Quran, where the Quran is proof itself. We don't need to look to get help for understanding the Quran. We can't evaluate Al-Kafi like that. Al-Kafi has to be evaluated when you see all the ahadith. It's a holistic picture. With the Quran, you do it with all the verses. Some verses may interpret others, but with ahadith, you can't just stick to Al-Kafi. Don't ignore all the other collections of ahadith and now say which is sahih, which isn't. That's something, it's deficient, that approach. It's good statistics-wise to see how many it has, but you can't come and extrapolate religion only from that. Most important of all, because there may be decent, reliable or weak ahadith which with contextual indicators will be upgraded, and you've just ignored them all by just looking at the sound ones. Now, especially these three scholars, we said they were connected in the time of the Imam. Now, we said even if the chains are weak, Ayatul Khuy doesn't accept. He says we have to see who are the chains now. The majority, however, say, look, after 1400 years, there may be weaknesses in the chain for us. But for these who are connected to that time, when Khulaini says all my traditions are sahih, I've brought the chains of all of them. When he says that, he must have had contextual indicators, access to them to come up with this. Maybe 1400 years later, those have been lost for us. We don't have such an access, but they had it. One of Sheikh Khulaini's incredible things, that the chains of transmission, he's mentioned all the names from beginning to end. It's all complete. I'm not saying they're all sahih, but they're all complete. But I'm saying, before we say it's not sahih, think twice about it. He was living in the times of the deputies. He must have had contextual indicators to bring this hadith, even if it's from a non-imami, even if it's from a non-reliable source. He must have had other indicators. Now, Imam Khomeini goes one step higher now. He says, with Sadur, with Sheikh Sadur, even if there are incomplete chains, I accept the ahadith of Sheikh Sadur. And he's accepted many. They call it mursal traditions, where it's incomplete, the chain of transmissions, we're missing two names. But when Sadur, if it's from Sadur, Imam Khomeini accepts it. He's accepted many ahadith like this. And that's because he studied who Sheikh Sadur is, the meticulousness of Sheikh Sadur. Look at this lower transmission here. Sadur narrates from a transmitter who narrates from an Egyptian transmitter, who narrates from X, from Y to the Imam. Now Sadur is in Ray, on the outskirts of Tehran. Well, it was Tehran then maybe. He's there, he's narrated from a transmitter in his vicinity, maybe an ustad, maybe, he had many, but he's still not sure. He doesn't trust this ustad completely, or this transmitter. There's a bit of doubt. He travels to Egypt. This is more than 1,000 years ago. He travels to Egypt to get access to the Egyptian transmitter. Once he's sure about it, then he brings the hadith. Someone who's ready to go there, to Egypt, to make sure the hadith is sahih, when he says to us, this hadith is sahih, okay, 1400 years later, just because we don't know the name of one or two of the transmitters because it's missed out, okay, for us it's a loss. But Imam Khomeini said, if Sadur said it, we accept. Ayatul Khuy doesn't accept it, but although the majority may not even accept one, saying just Sheikh Sadur, but Imam Khomeini has accepted. So that's another contextual indicator. Another is if a hadith is mentioned in a number of primary sources. We mentioned the 400 sources. I explained that yesterday. And here, with these 400 sources, not all of them are with us today. Some of them were burnt, lost because of invasions, wars, and so on and so forth. But remember the example of Sheikh Sayyid Radi, who compiled Nahjul Balagha. He had access to them when he compiled it. Now we've lost them because of a fire. But we know Sayyid Radi had access to them. So do we trust him or not? Many people say, yes, we trust him because of the person who he is. They trusted him from 1,000 years ago. And today, up to now, 70 or 80% of natural balagha, it's been found, its sources. But 20% hasn't been found yet, and may never be found. It's possible. And so when you see a hadith in a number of these sources, again, because of it being implausible for there to have been a kind of harmony or joint coordination to spread falsehood, it becomes more and more implausible. They accept it, even if the chains are weak. It's like, for example, let's say I have 10 students and I'm giving them some information. Okay? Next week I come to teach them and I'm speaking. One of them says, but last week you said this. Well, I'll say to them that, no, you were mistaken. You didn't listen properly. I'm the teacher, they're students, and there was only one of them. Okay, let's say there were 20 students. There was only one who said, well, I said, no, you didn't listen properly. But imagine there were 7 or 8 of them. I said, no, Ustad, you said this. We have it too. I would say it's implausible for there to be a joint coordination for them to lie. Why would they want to lie against me? You know? But with one, I wouldn't be satisfied. But when there's 7 or 8 or 12 or whatever, I'll think twice about it. So this is another one. Now, if Ayatollah Behboudi again, although this wasn't his aim, it's just that some people are abusing his research. Okay, he just said, let's say 80% are not sahih, okay. But it may be hasan, it may be muwaththaq, it may be weak, okay. But those which are weak or muwaththaq or hasan, they're not sound, they may have, there may be narrations in other sources with the same content and it may be sahih there. You see, that will be a contextual indicator. With the ahadith, you have to look at all of them, not just al-Kafi. So that's number 4. The 5th contextual indicator is known with the title of well-known abidance. What does that mean? So assuming the disciples of the Imams or the post-minor occultation jurists up to Allama Hilli in the 7th century. So like Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Sadur, Sheikh Tusi and others until, so those who followed from the time of Ismat, who followed from there, were joined to it and they followed. They use this hadith and they act upon a given hadith and they use it as a basis for a fatwa. So with a certain fatwa, they use this certain hadith and they give the fatwa and they act upon it. You see Sheikh Mufid acting upon it, Sheikh Sadur and Sheikh Tusi, Allama Hilli, they're all acting upon it. Now this would be proof for us that the hadith emanates from an infallible and we can accept it even if today that hadith we see the chains are weak. You see, the chains are weak after 1400 years. It's the same chains that they had, but they acted upon it. It means they had access to things that we don't have today. Why would they all act upon it? So here they say, it's well known that these jurists, but they have to be only those jurists stuck to the time of occultation. And we know that they've abided by the hadith. They use it as a fatwa and they acted upon it. Well-known abidance compensates for the weakness of the chain of transmission. Here the majority, 95%, accept it. Ayatollah Khoui doesn't though. He says, no, I have to see the chain of transmission. Whether they had access to other contextual factors which led to their certainty, good for them, but for me, no. The same person, what he said with Ibn Qulaway and Ali ibn Ibrahim, he's not ready to compromise here. But it's a minority position, this. Again, in Ayatollah Behboudi's book, or Ayatollah Muhammad Asifi Mohseni's book, where they only take the Sahih from the Al-Kafi or Bihar al-Anwar, with this contextual indicator, many of the weak ahadith become upgraded, but they say they don't bring it. I'm sure even those two, in their ijtihad, were they to be a marja, they would have also upgraded it, but the analysis they did was just to focus on the sahih. They didn't want to extrapolate religion from those. It was a piece of research they did. So this is another contextual indicator, and this is the last contextual indicator I'll be mentioning, is where the disciples or the post. Oh yeah, so an example of this, okay, some people say is this, that for example, women being judges, okay, there may be some hadith which are weak when we see it today. They may be weak today if you see the chain of transmission. But these scholars all said women can't be judges. Okay? And so many people, because of this, they say it compensates for the weakness of the chain of transmission. Ayatollah Khoui says, no, I can't say that. And that's why you see many of Ayatollah Khoui's students, in relation to women being leaders or judges, they have certain positions. And even if they say they can't, it's because of repercussions that result with that woman's husband having certain rights over them, acting as a barrier for the woman to be a true judge or leader. Otherwise, if they didn't have a husband, it would have been easier, but that's not something which Islam wants to promote. Anyway, there are many discussions. I don't want to just mention one or two aspects to this, but this is just one example. Now, here though, where the disciples in number 6, or post-minor occultation jurists, they disassociate themselves and turn away, action-wise, from Sahih Hadith. So we have a Sahih Hadith, the chain of transmissions are all sound, with how we explained it. But we see, so why did Sheikh Saduq, Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Tusi, Al-Amhili, why did none of these act upon it? They turned away from it. They must have had access to other contextual indicators that we don't have today. The very fact that they've turned away from it, it means that they had access to something which told them this is weak, even though the chain of transmissions is sound. So when all of them are turning away, those jurists connected to the time of occultation, there's no hujjiyah, probativity anymore to act upon it. Now one example here, which they usually state, is the punishment of burning. They say apostates, burn them. Or, for example, other crimes. Here, you see, where have you seen, for example, in, let's say, Iran as a model compared to other countries, the best model we have today of Islamic law, although it has weaknesses too, but it's the best model we have today. When have they ever burnt anyone in Iran? When have they ever burnt an apostate? Never. But we have Sahih Hadith. So why don't we burn them then? Because when you see Sheikh Tusi, Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Saduq, all these sheikhs, they were stuck. Sheikh Khulaini, he was in the time of the deputies. There was something they knew. Now Ayatollah Khoui doesn't accept this contextual indicator too. So theoretically, he would accept the burning of apostates. Theoretically, I don't know what his ruling is, but he doesn't accept this contextual fact indicator. He only accepts number 1, the chain of transmissions, and with the research he did, Ibn Qulaway, whatever is in Kamil al-Ziyarat, Ali ibn Ibrahim, whatever is in his tafsir, all the transmitters there, I accept them. And there may be 1 or 2 other things he said, it's not something which is in my mind right now. Okay. So there were 6 contextual indicators. These 6 contextual indicators, there are many, there are more than 40. These have the role of upgrading normally decent, reliable or weak ahadith. They have that role. And that's why it's important. So that was the chain of transmissions. The next were content-related contextual indicators. What about the content? Here, the contextual indicator is it on a par with the Quran? Now this is very important. When we say is it on a par with the Quran, is it on a par with the logic of the Quran, the spirit of the Quran? I mean, if it's exactly the same as a Quranic verse, well, you don't need the hadith, you have the Quran. But this is very important, because if a hadith is a weak hadith, look, weak hadith, but it's on a par with the Quran, it's explicit or implicit in the Quran, of course you'll accept it. That's a definite upgrader. You shouldn't even doubt it. Look, when it's in the Quran, you shouldn't even doubt it, even if all on a given subject, it's all, for example, weak traditions. It doesn't matter. We don't even need those traditions. It's in the Quran. Or it's on a par with indisputable mutawatir ahadith. It's on a par with aql or your fitra. These are ethical ahadith which comes. It's on a par with aql or your fitra or other things. Sometimes it's on a par with established, documented historical facts. History is a science. We had them the 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century, Ibn Mas'ud, Ya'qubi, Tabari, all these are books and they're all giving the certain trends of history. There's commonality. You can't just put that aside. Sometimes history can act as a contextual indicator, but as I said before, contextual indicators, they vary in their strengths. Naturally, with the Quran, it's the most strongest. It can just reverse something totally. And sometimes the sublimity of a text is such that someone like Allama Tabatabai will say, only Amirul Mu'mineen could write Nahjul Balagha. I don't care, whatever source, you show me, disprove or prove, whatever. Only Ali alayhi salam could have written this. So these are content-related contextual indicators. So they were chain of transmission. These are content. Now the reason I'm not going to talk too much about the content, because now I want to introduce a case study. Okay, a case study where all these are now, I want to bring together in practice. Or before that, Allama Majlisi. So now, if I was to tell you, this man was the ultimate upgrader, now you understand. In Biharul Anwar, he brought more than 500,000 ahadith. And he said, there's Sahih, there's Hasan, there's Muwaththaq, and they're weak. He tells us, he's brought everything. But he brought them with a context in mind, that I'll bring this weak one, but I know this is upgraded, so it can be regarded as Sahih. I'll bring the Hasan, I know that can be easily upgraded with these contextual indicators of the content or the chains of transmission. I'll bring the Muwaththaq, it's from a Sunni too, I know it can be upgraded. He saved the heritage of Shiism. At the same time, another scholar compiled twice the amount of Biharul Anwar. But he wasn't as scholarly as Allama Majlisi. He didn't think of upgrading, so he brought a lot for the sake of just bringing them. Allama Majlisi brought them, compiled. He's a compiler. And there are many commentaries written in Biharul Anwar. It's not just all hadith. He explains it. And it's evident that he has a team of people there. He's allocated some people to write on certain ahadith, some people to write. Sometimes you see, there's one scholar who's written something on a hadith, who doesn't believe in the immateriality of the soul. But then there's another scholar giving a commentary of a hadith there, who does accept the immateriality of the soul. So it's mixed. But the compiling of the ahadith right now is what's important. And he had this in mind, that he can upgrade them. He can upgrade them. The same Allama Majlisi, in one of the books of Ahadith, he's looked at all the books with a certain specific, restrictive methodology. The book is called Mir'atul Ughul. I have to introduce this book because it's important for the case study. Mir'atul Ughul, where in this book, the way he's looking at it now is, if a given hadith hasn't been given the stamp of approval from two Rijali experts, biography of the transmitters of the 3rd, 4th, 5th century. If two Rijali experts haven't given the substantiation of justice in relation to the transmitters of a given hadith, if two haven't given it, the hadith is da'if, weak. Normally, and he's done this with Bihar al-Anwar and other books, what he says, and normally with everyone, even today, even Untitled Chapter, if one expert, or Rijali expert, like Najashi or Kashi or Sheikh Tusi in his famous Rijali book Al-Udda, or Allama Hilli, and there are many others, if one of them is substantiated, that's enough. But he went one step ahead, only in that book, and said if there are not two substantiations, I'll regard it as weak. Look, that's a totally different methodology he's used there. Now, whatever his purpose there was, okay. But he saved the heritage of Shiism responsibly, unlike that other scholar who just compiled for the sake of compiling. So, see him as the ultimate upgrader, Allama Majlisi. By taking the contextual indicators, what can be a weak hadith can be upgraded. Contextual indicators pertaining to the chain of transmission, and contextual indicators pertaining to the content. Okay. Now, when I came here 10 days ago, a brother sent me a pamphlet of a group this group, and without doubt they are well-intended people. I don't want to shed any suspicion or don't want to speak negatively of them. They were researchers and they've produced a lot of good work too. What they've written on Imamate I've seen, and other things, they've written very good works. But one of them now has produced something where the fact that the Imams or the Prophet know all our deeds as we do them. As we do them, he has access to all our deeds. It's called Ardul A'mal, the presentation of our deeds to the Prophet. So he sees everything that we do. They wanted to refute this. The methodology they used, they looked in Al-Kafi alone. That's the first problem. See, you should now be thinking now, you know the mechanisms of action involved. They only looked at Al-Kafi. They brought the 6 from a chapter called Presentation of the A'mal. There were 6 hadith there. If they looked in other chapters of Al-Kafi, the same collection, they would have found more, but they didn't look at those. It's a weakness in methodology. They only looked at the chapter which said presentation. But if they look in Salat, Zakat, other areas too, hidden, they exist, such ahadith. But no, they only looked at the chapter which was specifically written, Presentation of A'mal. There were 6 of them. They brought the 6. And they very, very intelligently, they translated it. It was good translation. The presentation was good. The methodology, I'm suggesting the methodology could have been better. These people are thinkers. It's evident that they're thinking. We shouldn't, kind of suppress them or attack them. And maybe I'm saying something wrong here. You see? But let's look at the 6 hadith that they've used why they've rejected it, and then what we have to say about each one. So in the first one, Muhammad ibn Yahya, if it's in yellow, the transmitter was sound, according to them. In red, there's a problem with the transmitter. So Muhammad ibn Yahya narrates from Ahmad ibn Muhammad, from Al-Hussein ibn Sa'id, from Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad, and the reason was because he was a Waqifi, from Ali ibn Abi Hamza, who was also a Waqifi and usurped a lot of money, who narrates from Abu Basir, he is sound, from Imam Sadiq, who said all actions of servants, good and bad, are presented upon the Messenger of Allah every morning, so be attentive of them, and this is the Almighty Allah saying, and say, do for Allah will see your deeds, and so will His Messenger. Sorry, if I just want to check something. Oh, okay, yes. A doubt just came to my mind. Yes. No. Okay. So they bring this verse and say, do, for Allah will see your deeds, and so will His Messenger. So all actions of servants are presented to the Messenger of Allah. Now here, they said because of those two in red, we have a problem. Okay? Now, here, therefore, they say the hadith is deemed weak when you're analyzing the chain of transmission. This group only use ayatul khui mainly. That's very restrictive methodology. But the question is, can the weakness be compensated by contextual indicators? And the answer we say is yes, in two ways. One is, we have sahih, sound traditions reported with the same meaning as these in other primary sources. I'll bring one of them in a minute. Look, when you only look at Al-Kafi, this is the problem. But we have traditions from other collections which are saying the same that Al-Kafi in this hadith is saying. So this upgrades that hadith, and also it's on a par with the Quran. Now that we have to, I'll give a tafsir of the verse tomorrow, inshallah. We'll go through the verses. And if we prove, like everyone has proved, that the verse of the Quran is clearly saying it's presented every action we do to the Imam or the Prophet, then we don't even need the hadith anymore. Okay? Their problem is they've misinterpreted the Quran too. It's a very weak interpretation they've given of the verse of the Quran. And you know what the problem is? Sometimes they use ayatul khui, sometimes they don't use ayatul khui. I'll explain why later. You can't do that. This is not a game. If you want to do pure academic work, you have to have a kind of, you can't just use a bit of this and a bit of that. Or at least don't make a quick conclusion. And then, this is the same meaning in another book called Basair al-Darajat, and one of those 400 books. And here, Al-Sindi ibn Muhammad from Al-Ala ibn Razin, from Muhammad ibn Muslim, I asked Imam Baqir whether or not the actions are presented upon the Messenger of Allah. He replied, there's no doubt in the matter. Then he was asked about the verse, and say, do as you will, for Allah will see your deeds, and so will His Messenger and the believers. He replied, Allah has witnesses on earth. And here, all transmitters in this hadith are deemed trustworthy by Najashi, who is one of the Rijali experts, one would be enough, and by Sheikh Tusi. And the same content of hadith by this collector and compiler exists with different chains of transmissions, all sahih in the same book, in Basair. This is just one example. There are tens of them when you look in other books. So I'm just trying to show this methodology is wrong. You just look at Al-Kafi. And we said it's on a par with the Quran. That's the ultimate of upgraders now. You don't even need hadith. And we did mention this. The Waqifis, they became Waqifi at the time of the demise of the 7th Imam. Until then, they were followers of Imam Baqir or Imam Sadiq. They were okay then. And with some of them, Ayatollah Khoui himself says, he's a Waqifi, but he's reliable. Because in that time, he was reliable. Look, so we can't give a universal claim here. Each one has to be looked at separately. Some Waqifis may be still reliable, some Waqifis aren't. Depends who they are, what they've done, how they've done it, and so on and so forth. So you see, that's one hadith. A second hadith they bring by Ahmad ibn Muhammad from Al-Husayn ibn Sa'id, from Al-Nadr ibn Suwayd, from Yahya al-Halabi. There's only one which is doubted, questionable in this one, from Abdul Habib al-Ta'i, from Ya'qub ibn Shu'ayb. I asked Abi Abdullah concerning Allah saying, and say do, for Allah will see your deeds, and so will His Messenger and the believers. The Imam replied, they, the believers, are the Imams. And this translation I've used from their pamphlet, and I thank them for it. Yes. Then they say that this Yahya al-Halabi, there are two of them. There are two of them. And when there are two of them, we don't know who they are. And since we don't know who they are, that's a problem. We can't accept this chain of transmission. So this is the problem of this being weak here, is this, the second out of 6 in Al-Kafi. Then they say, Allama Majlisi also says this is da'if in Mir'atul Ughul. Look, Mir'atul Ughul was that specific text of Allama Majlisi. Well, very specific. He said, if there are not 2 Rijali experts, I'll say it's da'if. Otherwise, when there's one, it's sound. You can't use Allama Majlisi's criterion here to extrapolate religion. This is not academic, what they've done here. So when Allama Majlisi deems a hadith weak in Mir'atul Ughul, it's different compared to his other books. In this particular book, Mir'atul Ughul, he has opted for a specific methodology whereby any hadith whose transmitters have not been authenticated by 2 earlier Rijali experts, they'll be regarded as weak. If they're not authenticated by 2, where the norm was, if it's substantiated by 1, it's okay. But now he says 2. Now maybe Allama Majlisi's aim was this, that those which are authenticated by 2, it's very special. And that's why those hadith, he gives the term a'la'i ahadith, very all lofty ahadith. And the more higher approach. Otherwise, all the transmitters here in this hadith are authentic. Okay, so here, everyone's authentic there. Now, according to Allama Majlisi, 2 or 3 of them, since they weren't authenticated by 2, Allama Majlisi says in that book, but in Bihar al-Anwar, he'll upgrade it. And his approach is that of upgrading. So he's kind of mixing different, aspects. And concerning Yahya al-Halabi, they said it can be one of 2 people. Well, for you're confused about it. Why aren't other scholars confused about it? They've done more research, looked at the history, looked at tens of Yahya al-Halabis, and they've clearly discerned which one is which. And for them it's not a question, and many scholars have said this. Ayatollah Makarim, Subhani, and so on and so forth. There's no confusion for them. And finally, again, it's on a par with other Sahih ahadith, and ultimately we're saying it's on a par with the Quran. That this is a lost cause where we're going. And tonight being Laylatul Qadr, one of the nights again, it's all about the presentation of our a'mal. This is something we're breathing these nights, where 1 year of our actions in the Lawh Mahfuz, it's written and brought to the Imam, who's going to be the exeter in relation to everything for 1 year. Hadith number 3, Ali ibn Ibrahim. Ayatollah Khoui. Remember? This we have to say it's given, we accept it. But they don't. So Ali ibn Ibrahim narrates from Uthman ibn Isa, narrates from Sama'a who heard from Imam Sadiq, who said, what's wrong with you? Why do you disappoint the Messenger of Allah? A man asked, how do we disappoint the Messenger of Allah? The Imam replied, don't you know that your deeds are presented before him? When he finds sins in them, it disappoints him. Don't disappoint the Messenger of Allah. Do things that make him happy. Today, the same applies. Don't disappoint your 12th Imam. When he sins, you're sinning, you're lying, you're cheating, you're stealing, you're backbiting. He gets disappointed when he sees it. Have some haya. Be embarrassed before him. They have a problem with these two. But with Ayatollah Khoui, this is a definite accept. Even Ayatollah Khoui, if you were to tell him, do you believe in Aradul A'mal ala Nabi, the presentation of A'mal? He would have just written, of course I do. Ask his best students today, Ayatollah Wahid Khurasani, Ayatollah Sistani, ask them, do we believe in Aradul Amal? They all say yes. No marja says no. And now this group, with something they've heard about Ayatollah Behboudi and Muhammad Asifi, now they had a certain reason for doing what they did, but you take from there. Then you only use Al-Kafi, neglect all the other collections. And then use a bit of Ayatollah Khoui's methodology, a bit of this methodology. You come up with, it's all concocted. It'll all be messed up. You can easily do it in a much better way. And the conclusion is wrong. Because I was only given this 10 days ago. And I didn't want to mention it, but the problem is the conclusion was wrong. This conclusion should not be, disseminated. Now, these two, they find problematic. Now, first of all, this hadith has been classified as trusted and dependable by many sources, including Allama Majlisi, father and son. Now, they say, Allama Majlisi in Mir'atul Ughul says it's da'if. But in other places, Allama Majlisi says it's sahih. The methodology he used was different. Uthman ibn Isa has been deemed a Waqifi, okay. But still, many, including Ayatollah Khoui, deem him trustworthy, because this is from Imam Sadiq now, which is being, that Waqifi, if the events of the Waqifi was with the demise of Imam Kadhim alayhi salam. But you can't say just because he turned bad, at that time, when he was good, and he was relating good things. Our other parameters come into play here. So one of the contextual indicators strongly accepted by Ayatollah Khoui and others is that those transmitters who have been related by Ali ibn Ibrahim are all considered trustworthy. And he said the same in relation to Ibn Qulaway. So here, Ali ibn Ibrahim, at least Ayatollah Khoui will accept it. The others accept it too, because they don't see the waqifiness being a barrier. And with Sama ibn Mihran, he's been authenticated by Najashi. They say, no, he's been authenticated by Najashi, but also he's been refuted by another expert. Then they say, of 800 years ago, a scholar said, whenever you have one Rajali saying no, another saying yes, we reject it. Okay, that one person was of this belief. What if another one says, well, we would have to see which one has more weight in them. And the scholars give this a lot of more weight, Najashis, over those who have rejected them. So it's only a question of methodology which makes it different. But to say outright, this is wrong, this is weak, period, that's wrong. Hadith number 4. Now this is how they wrote it. Ali narrates from Ali's father, who narrates from Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad al-Zayyad, who is unknown. That's why it's weak. Who related from Abdullah ibn Aban al-Zayyad, and they're unknown too. So two unknowns. I asked Imam Rida to pray for me and my family. The Imam said, am I not praying for them? I swear by Allah that your deeds are presented before me every day and night. The Imam said to me, do you not read Allah saying, and say do, for Allah will see your deeds, and so will His Messenger and the believers. As I say, the tafsir of the Quran tomorrow. So they say these two are unknowns. They say this is declared weak. therefore, because when the chain is incomplete, it's not sahih, so it's weak. But is this the end of the story? The same content we said, it's mentioned in other chains, in Al-Kafi and outside. That's one contextual indicator. Didn't Kulaini have indicators before him to suggest the reliability of the hadith that we don't have today? But he had them there. He was connected to the time of Ismat. He lived in a district surrounded by Sunnis and was asked to prepare a compendium of Sahih ahadith so that the Shias can have a complete manual. And for some like Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, this is proof, unless proven otherwise. Others are not satisfied with Kulaini's claims, because Kulaini says this is all Sahih, and he's brought the chains of all of them. He's brought the chains, every single one. Now, Ayatollah Jawadi says, look, when he does that in a certain context and claims, most of it has to be Sahih, but he had access to contextual indicators we don't have today. But then, with Ali, made me suspicious, because usually they didn't say Ali said, they say Ali son of someone said. So the pamphlet, it said from Ali's father. The poor brothers missed something out. They missed it. When I looked at the original source, it was Ali ibn Ibrahim. This makes a big difference. Because Ali ibn Ibrahim was the one that Ayatollah Khoui said, whoever transmitters that come from him, it's all I accept. They missed that for whatever reason. Okay, so this, yes, it may be weak because there are two unknowns, but that universal granting of reliability by Ayatollah Khoui there upgrades it and converts it to reliability. The fifth hadith, Ahmad ibn Mahran. I'm just saying this for you to understand, it's not a game. These are very complicated processes that for 14 centuries it's been evolving. You can't come and invent your own system of just saying that this does not exist in our beliefs. Why? Because look at what Al-Kafi is saying only. It's not correct. The methodology is wrong. The intentions may be sincere, but the methodology can't be accepted. This one, Ahmad ibn Mahran, who's weak, relates from Muhammad ibn Ali, who's sound, who relates from Abi Abdullah al-Samit, who's unknown, who relates from Yahya ibn Musawwir, who's unknown, who relates from Imam Baqir alayhi salam. This really looks a very twisted ahadith with these unknown variables. On hearing the verse of chapter 9, verse 105, he said, I swear by Allah that he, the believer, mentioned in the verse, is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now here, again, there are too many unknowns here. That's why they say it's okay, it's weak. But it's from Kulaini though. It's from Sheikh Kulaini, who claims all the hadith to be sound. And he brings the chains. But when we see it 1400 years later, there's a problem, okay. But do you give him the benefit of the doubt? Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli says, yes, I do. Ayatollah Khoui says, I don't. And they're both right in their own way. Okay? So, and furthermore, the content is on a par with the Quran, where it says, Imam Mubin, we have a hadith in tens, where it says Imam Mubin is Amirul Mu'mineen, in chapter 36, verse 12. So it's on a par with the Quran, this hadith. And there are several other ahadith with sound chains in other sources again. And finally, hadith number 6, they say a number of people relate from Ahmad ibn Muhammad, from Al-Washar, that Imam Rida alayhi salam said, Alhamdulillah, this one, they said it's Sahih. And they said, Allahumma Majlisi said it's Sahih in Mir'at, so this must be Sahih. Yes, there. That all the deeds, good and bad, are presented before the Messenger of Allah. And this, they said, Allahumma Majlisi said in Mir'atul Ughul. So there were two authentications from Rijali experts. Okay, so here, you see, with these 6, when you look at it now, these 6 in this slide, you see how easily they become upgraded. And without a doubt, this tawatur in meaning, in this meaning, when you look at all the ahadith, without exaggerating, there are more than 100 ahadith with this meaning. Now let's say we say they're all weak, assume. They're all weak. And personally, it may be something I may believe in, for example. Someone can say, I don't care, they're all weak. It's all in the Quran, brother. See the Quran. The Quran is explicitly mentioning this. And tomorrow, inshallah, we'll go through the Quranic interpretations of 3 or 4 ahadith, where this presentation of the amal is evident. It's not something which is very remotely extrapolated. It's explicit. And all the commentators today are saying it. Ayatollah Khoui believes in it. Look how such a conclusion can really cause, not on purpose, but it causes mischief. Mischief will be spread. I'm not doubting their sincerity, but I'm saying the conclusion is going to cause mischief. And one has to be careful. Okay. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى الطاهرين. So, yesterday I forgot to read the words of bereavement. And so today I'll do yesterday's and today's with your permission. It shouldn't take more than 5 or 6 minutes. Yes. So the Imam was struck by Ibn Muljam's sword. The cursed one flew the scene. Some went after him. People's cries and lamentations were increasing, totally astonished, bewildered. They ran to the mihrab. There they saw Amir al-Mu'mineen on the floor, his head having received a serious injury. The Imam was rubbing earth onto the place of trauma, uttering the holy verse, مِنْهَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ وَفِيهَا نُعِيدُكُمْ وَمِنْهَا نُخْرِجُكُمْ تَارَةً أُخْرَى. From it, earth, did we create you, and into it you shall return, and from it we shall bring you forth another time. How right Allah's command was, how accurate the messenger's words turned out to be. Amir al-Mu'mineen would say, هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. Blood was constantly being discharged. News reached Imams Hassan and Hussein alayhim as-salam. They arrived at the mosque and saw their father lying at the mihrab. 1 or 2 of the companions were trying to stand the Imam on his feet and to see whether he can execute the salat. He hadn't the energy any longer. Amir al-Mu'mineen asked Hassan alayhi salam to lead the salat and that he would follow as ma'soom behind the Imam while sitting. After the salat ended, Imam Hassan alayhi salam approached his father, exclaiming, by Allah, observing this sight has paralyzed me. And he started crying. Amir al-Mu'mineen replied, don't cry, son, you must be happy. Your grandfather, Muhammadun al-Mustafa, is awaiting me. Your grandfather, your grandmother, Khadija al-Kubra, and your mother, Fatima alayha salam, they're awaiting for me. Don't cry, because your crying has led the angels to cry. After wrapping his head with a cloak, they started to exit the mosque towards home. فَغَشِيَ عَلَيْهِ سَاعَةً. The Imam would fall unconscious for moments and then regain consciousness. فَبَكَى الْحَسَنُ بُكَاءً شَدِيدًا. Imam Hassan would start crying loudly. فَسُقِطَ مِنْ دُمُوئِهِ قَطَرَاتٌ عَلَى وَجْهِ أَمِيرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. The cries of Hassan alayhi salam, the tears would flow and fall on the face of Amir al-Mu'mineen. فَفَتَحَ عَيْنَهُ وَرَآهُ بَاكِيًا. And when it would fall, the tears on his face, Amir al-Mu'mineen would gain consciousness again and see his son crying. Ya bunay, ya Hassan, ma hadha al-buka wal-jaza. What's all this crying and lamenting for? Ya bunay, atajza'u ala abik. Are you agitated over your father? Whilst وَقَدًا تُقْتَلُ بَعْدِي مَسْمُومًا مَدْلُومًا. You yourself, tomorrow, you're going to be killed, poisoned, in a state of oppression. وَيُقْتَلُ أَخُوكَ. Your brother's going to be killed. بِالسَّيْفِ هَكَذَا. Your brother too will be killed with a sword. Imam Hassan alayhi salam then said, "O father, do you know who struck you?" Amir al-Mu'mineen replied, "Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam. Soon he'll be brought from that entrance," referring to the Kanda gate of the mosque. All eyes were fixed at the Kanda entrance. After a brief period, the sound of people haphazardly walking towards the Kanda gate was heard. Ibn Muljam was caught and brought back to the mosque. People started hitting, thumping him, some spitting at him, some biting him. Ibn Muljam came face to face with Imam Hassan, who wouldn't make any eye contact with him. Imam Hassan alayhi salam started the dialogue. Ya waylak, ya la'in. O woe upon you, O wretched one, O cursed one. Ya adu Allah, O enemy of Allah. Anta qatil Amir al-Mu'mineen. You're the killer of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Mathakiluna Imam al-Muslimin. Look at the grief you've caused in relation to the Imam of the Muslims. هذا جزاؤه منك حيث آواك وقربك وأدناك وآثرك على غيرك. This was your recompensation. After him giving you refuge, after him having shown affinity towards you, shown closeness towards you, preferring you to others. There were certain scenarios where what Amir al-Mu'mineen, because he was with Amir al-Mu'mineen in the battle of Jamal, and there were many stories what Amir al-Mu'mineen would do to him. Whenever he wanted something, he would come to Amir al-Mu'mineen would purchase it for him or get it ready for him. The story of the dark red horse, for example, that he wanted, he was given, and many other things. Imam Hassan said, "This is your recompensation." Ibn Muljam was from Yemen, but he was residing in Kufa. And after the Khilafah of Amir al-Mu'mineen started, they moved to Kufa for specific historical reasons, and he was there. He gave his bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen in Kufa after Imam Ali's Khalifa started. And when he gave there were 10 Yemenis, very strong tribal leaders who came. They all gave their allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen. But when he gave it, Amir al-Mu'mineen said, "Will you give your allegiance again?" He gave it again, and for a third time he said, "Will you give your allegiance?" And then after this happened, he said, "Why did you want 3 from me?" He said, "Because you're going to go against me." So Ibn Muljam was hearing what Imam Hassan was saying. And then he said, after all that he's done, this was the recompensation you returned? وَهَلْ كَانَ بِئْسَ الْإِمَامِ لَكَ حَتَّى جَازَيْتَهُ هَذَا الْجَزَاءِ يَا شَقِي. Was he that bad of an imam that you had to do this and give this compensation, this recompensation to him, O wretched one? Ibn Muljam would remain silent, face down. He was then taken to Amir al-Mu'mineen. "Here's your enemy to be brought to justice," they said to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Imam Ali alayhi salam looked at him and then said in a low voice, "Verily you've led to something very big. You've committed a mighty big action. Was I that bad to you for me to have received such a strike? Didn't I show you compassion? Didn't I favor you at times? Didn't I show you beneficence? Didn't I increase divine bounties for you? Even though I knew you wanted to kill me, it was told a long time ago. But I wanted Allah to take revenge on my behalf. I wanted to change your beliefs in this world so that you can turn away from deviation and misguidance. But wretchedness and wickedness took over, predominated over you, O most wretched of the wretched. فَدَمَعَتْ أَيْنَا Ibn Muljam. Then Ibn Muljam started crying. وَقَالَ يَا أَمِيرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. He said, "O Amir al-Mu'mineen, أَفَأَنْتَ تُنْفِذُ مَنْ فِي النَّارِ." Are you going to help someone who's now in hell with such a status quo? Oh Amir, you're the leader, you're the Imam, but will you help? Amir al-Mu'mineen said to him, قَالَ لَهُ صَدَقْتَ. You're right. you're saying the truth. ثم التفت إلى ولده الحسن. Then he turned to Hassan and said to him, ارفق يا ولدي بأسيرك. That show affection, son. Amir al-Mu'minin is saying this to Imam Hassan. Show affection to this captive of yours. وارحمه, have mercy upon him. وأحسن إليه, show beneficence. وأشفق عليه, show compassion. ألا ترى إلى عيني قد طارتا في رأسه. Don't you see how his eyes are rolling around with fear? وقلبه يرجف خوفا ورعبا وفزعا, and his heart is distressed, fearful, agitated. فقال له الحسن, Imam Hassan replied, يا أباه, O father, قد قتلك هذا اللعين الفاجر وأفجعنا فيك وأنت تأمرنا بالرفق فيه. O father, he's killed you, this wretched, corrupt one, and he's caused us all the pain in this regard in relation to you, and now you're commanding us to show friendship towards him. Then Amir al-Mu'minin replied, قال له نعم يا بني, yes my son, نحن أهل البيت, we are أهل البيت. Then he gives a definition. لا نزداد على المذنب إلينا إلا كرما وعفوا ورحمة. That from us to the enemy nothing increases but dignity, forgiveness and mercy. والرحمة والشفقة, mercy and compassion. من شيمتنا, is our trends. These are the patterns of our action. Mercy, compassion. لا من شيمته, it's not their trends, but it's certainly our trends. We are Ahlul Bayt. بحقي عليك, son, by my right over you. اطعمه, feed him. يا بني مما تأكلوا, that which you eat, feed him. وأسقه مما تشرب, that which you drink, satiate him with. فإن أنا مت, if I was to die, فاقتص من, you retaliate and do what he did to me, do the same to him. The law of retaliation, the lexis talionis, so to speak, and that's what happened. They struck Ibn Muljam with one strike and he died. وَلَا تُهْرِقُهُ بِالنَّارِ, don't burn him in fire, don't burn his body. وَلَا تُمَثِّلْ بِالرِّجْلِ, no, don't amputate him. فَإِنِّي سَمِعْتُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ, I heard the Holy Messenger saying, يقول, he would always say, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْمُثْلَ, refrain from amputating. We don't amputate anyone. وَلَوْ بِالْكَلْبِ الْأَقُورِ, even if it's a wild dog, we don't amputate them. وَإِنْ أَنَا إِشْتُ, and if I was to live and not die, فَأَنَا أَوْلَى بِالْعَفْوِ عَنْهُ, it's more befitting for me in relation to him to forgive. فَنَحْنُ أَهْلُ الْبَيْتِ, for we are the Ahlul Bayt. لَا نَزْدَادُ, repeating again, that nothing increases to those who have sinned and rebelled against us, but afwan wa karama, forgiveness and dignity. The night of the 21st finally arrived, the year 40 after Hijrah. His Eminence Amir al-Mu'minin called all his relatives to assemble around him. These were the final moments. It was time to bid everyone farewell. Even during such a time when the effects of the poison were becoming more and more lethal, he had enjoined virtue to them all. He could no longer eat or drink anything. His lips would move solely for the purposes of recalling Allah and inviting those around him to Allah. I entrust you all upon Allah, Ali uttered. In reply, loud cries and lamentations were given from all. Then the Imam turned initially towards Imam Hassan, alayhi salam. Ya Aba Muhammad, Usika bil Hussein khaira. I enjoined that in relation to Hussein, you show a lot of good. The emphasis being with what's going to happen then with Hussein. فَأَنْتُمَا, you too are from me, minni, wa ana minkuma, and I am from you too. He then turned to his offspring, the offspring he had through other than Lady Fatima alayhi salam, and willed in a will, a testament to them, that never go against Hassan and Hussein alayhim salam. Then Ali alayhi salam exclaimed, Ahsan Allah lakum al-azar. May Allah dignify you all with patience. Allah wa inni munsarifun ankum. Beware, be aware that I'm leaving you. Wa rahilun fi laylati hadhihi. And tonight I'm going to journey and leave you all. وَاللَّاهِقٌ بِحَبِيبِي رَسُولَ اللَّهِ كَمَا وَعَدَنِي. And join my beloved one, the Holy Messenger, as he had promised. Then he turned to Lady Fatima's children again and said, so not from the other children, then to focus on Lady Fatima, her children, and said, you'll be undergoing lots of tribulations from enemies of old. He described to Hassan and Hussein alayhim salam what lies ahead, and that the key to all these trials is patience. Then to Hassan alayhi salam, Amir al-Mu'mineen had given a number of instructions. He started first uttering the Shahadatain and saying La ilaha illallah and Muhammad Rasulullah. He said, oh Hassan, I'm leaving you with what the Holy Prophet left me in his final testament, where he said, Usika ya bunay bis salat inda waqtaha. He said, I enjoin that you do the salat in its assigned time. Was zakat fi ahliha inda mahallaha. And give the zakat to those who merit it and at the right time. Was sumt inda shubha. Abandon suspicious things in eating and transacting. Wal iqtisad, always have moderation. Wal adl fi rida wal qadab, be you happy or angry, always try to preserve justice. Wa husnil jawar, be on a good terms with your neighbors. Ikram al-dayf, be dignifying to your guests. Wa rahmatil majhood, those who strive for a livelihood, show mercy to them. Wa ashabil bala, also those who have undergone a lot of burdens, show mercy to them. Wa silatul rahim, family ties, make sure it's always preserved and amended. Wa hubbil masakin, and have a love towards the impoverished, the miskin, the needy ones. Wa mujalasatihim, and assemble and sit with them, have food with them, and so on and so forth. Wa tawadhu, and have humility. فَإِنَّهُ مِنْ أَفْضَلِ الْعِبَادَةِ, this is the best of ibadat. Don't have lengthy worldly desires. قَصِّرِ الْعَمَلِ, shorten them. Recall death at all times. وَاذْكُرِ الْمَوْتِ, lead an ascetic lifestyle. After all, you're constantly exposed to death. Fear Allah both in private and in public, and don't act or speak in haste. وَإِيَّاكَ وَمَوَاطِنَ التُّهْمَةِ وَالْمَجْلِسَ الْمَذْنُونَ بِهِ السُّوءِ, refrain from places that will expose you to accusations and slander. Refrain from places that will be regarded or deemed with suspicion by the people. After all, a bad friend deceives one who accompanies him. Act solely for the sake of Allah. Don't enter into these one-to-ones, meaning arguments, with those who have no rationality or no knowledge or ignorant. Be moderate in relation to your expenses and your ibadat, and carefully scrutinize them. Recall Allah at all times. Have mercy upon your family, including the smaller ones. Respect the elders. Usika bi'afwi dhanb, I enjoin you to forgive those who sin, the sins against you. Wa kadhmil ghayd, soothe your anger. Wasilatul rahim, forbearance with respect to the ignorant. Have tafaqquh fi deen, know your deen, acknowledge your deen, be serious with it. Wat tathabbut fil umur, be in your actions, be steadfast. Wat ta'ahud lil Quran, let the Quran be a constant feature in your lives. And he then, وَحُسْنِ الْجَوَارِ, be good with your neighbors. وَالْأَمْرِ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَالنَّهْيِ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, always maintain amr bil ma'roof, and refraining and dissuading people from vice. Make sure you don't compromise this. وَاجْتِنَابِ الْفَوَاحِشِ, and refrain from sins. He would initially faint intermittently, and then towards the end he would regain consciousness again, then go back. And on one of these states when he regained consciousness, he recounted that he saw the Prophet, his uncle, and others who were waiting for him, and he told everyone, be happy. And with his final shahadatains, he exited this life and entered into the presence of the pure and holy. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله.